I love everything about Reed, except her real name. Like, I'm sorry girl, but Lochshiny Dublin, it's trash. And even setting aside my irrational hatred for her real name, Arknights is still well known for its terrible sense of naming things. But luckily, because Granite hasn't been added to the game yet, it hasn't completely jumped the shark. But we should definitely set that aside to talk about the woman of the hour. First things first, Reed is easily a top tier altar unit. Everything from her story to her class builds upon itself to make a good altar. Hell, a great altar. A video on what, in my opinion, makes a good altar is definitely going to have to be made at some stage, but in a quick 5-second summary, in my opinion, altars are at their best when they signify substantial growth for the character that becomes an altar. And Reed, besides being a great example of an altar unit done well, is also a great example of taking a pre-existing character and fleshing them out in a truly interesting and impactful way. And her story really begins in chapter 9 of Arknights and continues on in the What the Firelight Casts event. And with that little bit of preamble out the way, let's just hop straight into what Reed is all about. Lochshiny Dublin was born to a happy family, alongside her sister, who's an absolute baddie, Eblana. As a direct descendant of the Gaelic kings, she was set up for great things in life. Unfortunately, her parents were assassinated one day, and she was lucky to escape with her life, being used by Taryn's supporting nobility as a political pawn for many years. Unluckily for Reed, her sister Eblana was exceedingly ambitious and set about murdering those who had rejected them and who would use them as a political pawn in order to enact her own agenda, which is of course founding the Taryn revolutionary movement, Dublin. And in doing so, Eblana would make use of Reed as a political pawn, essentially turning Reed into the shadow leader. Reed, despite her objections with her sister's plan, went along with this for several years, until the Country Hillock incident, which is shown to us in the events of chapter 9. Despite her misgivings, Reed does commit large-scale domestic terrorism, and this leads to Reed questioning many of her life choices and inevitably getting herself caught up in the Victorian bombing of the city. Now, unfortunately for Reed, the Victorians wanted to use a little tactic called dirty bombing and completely blanketed the city with Originium bombs. It turned it into a man-made catastrophe, and Reed, despite surviving, was infected from this point on. Despite this, Reed was luckily saved by the absolute gilf, Outcast, and was carried to safety by Psylocke and Bagpipe. Outcast, however, sacrificed herself, killing the members of Dublin who wished to hunt Reed down. This would leave a big impact on Reed, as it was one of the first times in her life that someone genuinely, selflessly acted in her best interest. And afterwards, Reed would become a member of Rhodes Island. Reed's first words, after being saved from dying of eripathy, was, and I quote, "Why save me?" She's clearly exceedingly damaged after the events of Country Hillock and, of course, her upbringing. It does, however, lead us into the very next chapter of her life, which is shown to us in the What the Firelight Casts event, when she becomes Reed Alter. What the Firelight Casts tells us the story of Reed's return to Victoria that was set up at the end of chapter 11 of the main story. Reed's return to Victoria is not entirely peaceful, and she immediately has to begin aiding Taryn refugees. Reed protects them from Victorian soldiers and even Dublin Shadows. These Dublin Shadows are remnants of Eblana's arts, which is reanimating corpses using her flames. Now, it's probably a good time to mention that Reed's arts isn't as simple as they may seem. On the outside, they look like simple fire arts, but they are so much more broken than that. Reed and her sister Eblana control life with their flames. If that sounds broken to you, it is. Eblana regularly and casually uses necromancy, and Reed is capable of incinerating her enemies as well as being able to heal those around her with her flames. Reed meets up with Bagpipe and Chen while in Victoria. Chen is of course dripped the fuck out in one of the many outfits that will never become a costume for her, and they travel together for quite a while. Reed and Bagpipe finally getting a chance to talk to each other after the events of Country Hillock. It was, in fact, Rhodes Island policy to keep the two from meeting, and it would seem that it was pointless because they get on exceedingly well. After the raid by the Victorian military, Bagpipe of course learns about who Reed is, and when she confronts Reed, Reed immediately owns up to her crimes and admits that she is the leader. This shows Reed's conviction in a great way, as Reed could very easily deflect blame to her sister, but she is better than that. Reed has come to accept her own willing participation in the events of Country Hillock and is more than willing to accept Bagpipe's judgment if she is willing to dish it out. At one point, Reed had hoped through her death she could escape her past identity, which caused her to not hide from the Originium explosives that the Victorian military used. Bagpipe, now having learned the truth behind Dublin that she had sought, takes Chen and leaves Reed alone. Their relationship is broken, at least for the foreseeable future, but I am sure in the future that they shall one day reconcile. After this, however, Reed travels to the remnants of King Gale's castle, where she confronts the shadow of her sister, which is the Ablana boss fight from the What the Firelight Casts event. The shadow itself is keeping the dead in the area from resting, and as such, Reed decides that she has to snuff out this flame and confront her sister at the same time, managing to overcome it after coming to terms with the use of her own fire. Reed, after defeating the shadow of her sister, is now able to control her flames in order to heal her allies, finally making the fire her own. Reed now leads her own cell of Dublin. She realizes now that both her and Ablana have a vision of free Terrans. It's only that their paths in life and their willingness to commit violence is what separates them. However, they still fight for the same dream at the base level. As such, it is inevitable that the two shall meet again, and the CGs we get in this event show the difference between the two sisters better than words ever could. Ablana leads a functional military force, while Reed leads the downtrodden Terran refugees just seeking to get by. And that's about it. Reed Alter is a fantastic unit, and I've really been enjoying both playing with her and reading her story, and I'm very excited to see how it progresses into the future. Now, I do know that in Chapter 12, Ablana appears in a rather major role, which is set up at the end of What the Firelight Casts as well as Chapter 11. I am hopeful that Reed will appear at some stage in the main story so that she and Ablana may gain some form of closure. Based on Reed Alter's operator file, Ablana is still alive after the Londinium crisis for the foreseeable future in the world of Arknights. The story of the two dragon sisters is going to be ongoing. And to round out the video, let's just say you wanted to use Reed as an operator in game. And the only thing I can say is if you were lucky enough to pull her, you should 100% build her. Her third skill, which is what I have M3'd very recently, is exceedingly useful, and I find myself using it in a lot of different strats. She can be used as both a DPS, outs unit and a healer, although it's best if you try to combine both roles into one. As of course she can only heal by doing damage, it does sometimes lead to your operators dying a pretty horrible death, but for the most part that can be rectified with a bit of good placement on your behalf, as well as a supplemental healer, but for most general content purposes it won't be necessary. Now, I hope you all have a good day. You should love your fire dragon if you have her, and I will see you next time. Be good people.